I'd like to introduce myself as Dr. Siddhi Joshi, a marine biogeoscientist and human rights specialist. I'd like to thank the Institute of Zoology and the British Ecological Society for inviting and hosting me. My talk is entitled Stepping Stones and Stumbling Blocks, My Experiences of Intersectionality in Marine Science. So greetings from Sydney. I'm a marine biogeoscientist of British Indian heritage based in London. During my PhD, I specialised in marine sediment dynamics of coralline red algae known as MERL. I utilised a combination of laboratory measurements and numerical modelling to model the sediment mobility in Galway Bay. I'm the director of MERL, a rare seabed habitat documentary, and the blogger behind the Seabed Habitats blog. So during lockdown, I'm organising the Seabed Habitats Seminar series as part of the blog. I'm a committee member of Women in Coastal Geoscience and Engineering Network, which is an international network to support women in STEM. I've evolved into a human rights specialist and have a master's in international human rights law. I'm event secretary of Amnesty Galway and also the founder of the British Asian LGBTI support group as well. So these are two close-ups of MERL, the coralline red algae I study. MERL is pink when alive on the left and white or pale yellow colour when dead. It forms these nice large balls of calcified material known as rhodoliths. So on the right is just a handful of MERL debris which forms biogenic gravel beaches in County Galway. So, why marine science? Although I did not live by the sea when I was young, I've always had a fascination with nature and the sea. From a young age, I knew I wanted to do science of some sort. This varied a bit in my teens, but overall, I knew I wanted a career where you can always be inspired by natural phenomenon. I really enjoyed doing a major project during my A-level biology fieldwork with the Field Studies Council in freshwater ecology. But soon, the Blue Planet effect came into play as well, and I developed a keen interest in marine life. I attended open days at Southampton Oceanography Centre back then at the University of Southampton, Plymouth University and Bangor University, so three big centres in marine science. I had a distant dream of doing marine biology with oceanography, and fortunately I was accepted at University of Southampton to do the degree. So this is a highlight of my life, holding the Manx shearwater chick at Skomer Island. So my family have a love for nature and animals and the outdoors. But however, being medical doctors, they were initially uncertain to let me do marine science as a career. My dad accompanied me to one of the open days together at Southampton Oceanography Centre, and soon he gave his blessings to do the degree and discover the unknown. He saw the increasing significance of the science of oceanography for studying climate change and global issues. Now my family love marine science and share my fascination with marine life. They share my own enthusiasm for marine science and fully support my career. Here's a picture of my mum enjoying seal watching in Blakeney Point in Norfolk, where we saw hundreds of seals. So, my career journey so far. This is in fact a picture of 0 miles of the National Highway number 1. So it's a unique lamppost in North America at Key West in Florida. I did my schooling in Wimbledon in London and was very happy to do my undergraduate degree at Southampton University's NOC. I had the wonderful opportunity to do a summer placement in Institute of Ocean Science in Sydney in Canada at the start of my 3rd year. Following graduation, I did a placement with the Field Studies Council at Daleford Field Centre in Pembrokeshire, doing the USAD course in biological recording and species identification. Inspired by my summer placement in Canada, I then decided to do the MSc in hydrographic surveying at UCL. Following this, I moved to Galway in west of Ireland to study to do PhD in Earth and Ocean Science. As you will see, I developed an interest in human rights law and hence did my LLM in International Human Rights at the Irish Centre for Human Rights. I managed to do a year of postdoctoral research before lockdown occurred in 2020, something which slowed down my career significantly. So I moved back to London and spent the lockdown with my family. I had a very positive experience at the University of Southampton. During the early stages of my education, I was so grateful for studying at the Oceanography Centre that I did not worry about being a minority. There was loneliness, but overall it was a dream experience. There were times when I did feel like an ethnic minority for the first time in my life, and sometimes I did experience racism or racial bias from my peers. However, when my first year tutor at Southampton offered support by asking if I had experienced any racism in marine biology, I immediately said, "No, there's no racism in marine biology. It's about love for the seas and the natural world." He felt surprised by my answer, and I felt surprised that he was surprised. I'm not saying that I was discriminated against academically in my first and second year, but there were times when I felt quite isolated during my undergraduate degree. Then in the 3rd year came the sense of coastal pride. In many ways, studying coastal science has been an empowering experience for me as a woman seeking an active role to pursue a career so interconnected with nature. The inspiration of nature and the natural world has led me to be able to grow and accept who I am as a lesbian. In my experience, many coastal scientists as a whole tend to be very much accepting of people from many walks of life, including those belonging to diverse sexual orientations and those defying the gender norms. A sense of coastal pride has always been there since the early days of my undergraduate years. There are many positive, supportive, and accepting colleagues of all ages and beliefs. On the other hand, my LGBTI identity has sometimes posed unusual challenges in meeting the same glass ceiling encountered by many women due to gender inequality. Ironically, I was viewed as a non-traditional student, and this is like a shadow which followed me throughout my education. My experience of discrimination became even more complex, with issues such as race, homophobia, and intersectionality came into play. As a woman of colour, during my early years, I found myself kind of caught at the centre of a web of oppression, being a minority within a minority within a minority. Isolation and mental health issues stemmed from a lack of acceptance. With the dearth of minority role models in the marine sciences, there's an even greater need to form constituencies. My experiences over the years led me to explore intersectionality and human rights law further. I found I fell into the intersection between four axes: sexual orientation, race, sex, and disability. In future, factors such as age, religion, pregnancy, and maternity can become applicable. So what is intersectionality? Kimberly Crenshaw first coined the term in her landmark 1989 paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. The multidimensionality of a Black woman's experience contrasts with the single-axis analysis that can distort these experiences. The experience of a Black woman is not the same as that of a Black man or a white woman, meaning that her experience lies at an intersection of the axes of race and sex. White women suffer from gender bias and men of colour suffer from racial bias. However, both of their experiences differ from that of a woman of colour, because women of colour experience both racial and gender bias. Intersectional feminism examines the overlapping systems of oppression. So intersectionality is an analytical framework which can be used to identify vulnerabilities at the convergence of multiple identities. There are many, many different kinds of intersectional exclusions, not just Black women, but other women of colour, not just people of colour, but people with disabilities, immigrants, LGBTQ people, Indigenous people. The way we imagine discrimination or disempowerment often is more complicated for people who are subjected to multiple forms of exclusion. The good news is that intersectionality provides us a way to see it. More discussion can be found in the 1991 Mapping the Margins paper. So there are the 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act of 2010. Can anyone name them all? Please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay. Here they are. So age, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, pregnancy or maternity, marriage or civil partnership, religion or belief, and disability. Following my time at Southampton, this quote really resonated with me. I felt helpless and unable to challenge oppression I had faced. I didn't want to challenge the Oceanography Centre, but again, the words of Audre Lorde in her essay really resonated with me. I felt I was living in a country where racism, sexism, and homophobia were inseparable. It was due to the intersectional nature of my oppression. This highlights the need for intersectionality as an analytical framework to really understand oppression and hence dismantle it. It took me a number of years to come to this conclusion after utilising intersectionality to deconstruct my own personal experience of oppression in academia. So this brings me to the rather difficult question of institutional racism. I'm not saying I know the answers here, but first we need to understand what institutional racism is and why it can be so difficult to prove. The definition from the Macpherson report following Stephen Lawrence's inquiry is collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behaviours which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racist stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. So, how can we fight institutional racism? The first step is to accept that there is systemic racism in STEM disciplines. How can institutions challenge racial bias and discrimination experienced? What are the practical steps that can be made to support scholars from ethnic minorities in fieldwork? What steps can be made to decolonize the curriculum? How can we as ecologists and geoscientists become actively anti-racist? I feel if even some of these steps are followed, I believe it's possible to get rid of institutional racism. A highly recommended project currently is discussing similar questions by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is the URGE project. URGE strongly believe that our community needs to shift our culture from one that is at best passively not racist to one that is actively anti-racist. URGE is a global journal club or discussion forum with policy objectives and deliverables. There are over 300 discussion pods registered worldwide with over 1,000 participants in total. There's an extensive anti-racism curriculum with 8 sessions held over 16 weeks. Interviews with social scientists take place every fortnight with inclusivity tips and in-depth interviews. Practical learning deliverables for each pod are made each fortnight. I would urge you to look at the resources page on the URGE website. So when trying to deconstruct racism in marine science, I think we're luckier than in other disciplines. Our oceans are global and our natural world is interconnected across the artificial boundaries of race. One thing I knew when I finished from Southampton, I did not want to let anyone make me give up on oceanography, be it biological, geological, physical, or whichever discipline I picked. I wanted to do masters in order to ultimately do a PhD in marine science. I had to find a way to transform my energy into new and constructive energy. So now this is a true message from the gods. I had an interview after my MSc for a company, but it didn't go well as my heart was set on doing research and doing a PhD. I felt so disheartened at this point in my life. I had worked so hard to complete my master's and get a distinction in my MSc project, but I could not even get a 6-month job. Everyone I had asked was so discouraging that it was a really difficult time for me. So I was sitting in the rain, waiting for my train back home when I had a fortune cookie, and I opened my fortune to find a message. The wheel of good fortune is finally turning in your direction. I felt happy and hopeful, and for a brief moment, and I wondered what would come next. Then, whilst I was exploring the habitat mapping conference presentations, I saw a presentation by an Irish academic, Professor Colin Brown, who was in charge of the Understanding the Seabed project in Galway's main university, NUI Galway. In the final slide of his presentation, he had put this quote: "The difference between stumbling blocks and stepping stones is how we use them." All of a sudden, something clicked. All these problems I had been having with academics, I felt were entirely avoidable if they would just accept who I was. Soon, in a few months, I saw my ideal PhD project advertised on the Earthworks Jobs website. It was a fully funded PhD studentship on the Understanding the Seabed project, administered by Professor Colin Brown, with a Canadian hydrographer and geometrician, Dr. Gareth Duffy, as the postdoctoral researcher on the project. I applied for it, and to my surprise, I got a place at my first choice university. So before I knew it, I was doing the PhD in Marl sediment dynamics. It was my ideal PhD in the discipline of marine science, as it combined my multidisciplinary interests. My research during the PhD was in sediment mobility of marl beds, which was related to the hydrodynamics, sediment dynamics, and ecology of marl. So this is a topic which falls at the intersection of these three disciplines. It was a tough PhD, naturally, but with its own set of challenges. I had an excellent rapport with my supervisor, a slightly overambitious scope, and gender inequality at staff level at my institution was very significant. However, quality was always prioritized, and this was something which was very important to me. I did develop some health problems and developed a disability during my PhD, with a series of hospital admissions which slowed down my progress. I managed to submit successfully and pass the Viva, achieving a PhD in 7 years and 10 months. This resulted in 4 high-quality publications, a PhD-related documentary, and following my PhD, a co-authorship of a Springer Nature paper. So this was a challenging but highly rewarding experience overall. I pondered on the question, could justice, equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives have helped? So a recent survey on equality, diversity and inclusion in the geoscience, carried out in Ireland by the Irish Centre for Research in Applied Geoscience, shows that almost 60% of respondents agree that there are issues with prejudice in the workplace. So 14% strongly agree and 44% somewhat agree that there are issues with prejudice. More than 70% of respondents agree that there are issues with unconscious bias in the workplace. So 34% strongly agree and 39% somewhat agree that there are issues with unconscious bias. Almost 60% of respondents agreed that there are issues with inequity, exclusion and discrimination in the workplace. 20% of respondents strongly agree that there are issues with inequity, exclusion and discrimination, and 38% somewhat agree. So from the respondents where EDI initiatives were present in the workplace, 47% of the respondents were not sure if these initiatives were effective. So we need to be working on not only the presence of these EDI initiatives, but also on the quality of the EDI initiatives. So just after graduating with my PhD, I decided to join the Women in Coastal Geoscience and Engineering network as a committee member. WICGE was launched at the International Coastal Symposium in Sydney by a handful of women academics. We're a network of 270 plus women working worldwide in coastal geoscience and engineering across academia, industry and government. Currently, our committee has 14 women from 8 different countries. So why is Women in Coastal needed? Women in Coastal is needed because gender bias in STEM is not self-correcting as we had hoped. We did a study on steps to improve gender diversity in coastal geosciences and engineering between 2016 and 2018. The paper about the study was published in the Springer Nature Social Science journal, Palgrave Communications. 13 of us collaborated from different institutions, and it meant it has had a very high societal impact for a paper in this journal. Although I don't have time to go into it fully here, an in-depth theoretical review with data mining and a global survey were carried out before identifying constructive steps to improve gender diversity in this STEM discipline. The paper goes to propose 7 steps to make coastal geoscience and engineering more inclusive for women. First is to advocate for more women in prestige roles. Second, to promote females for visible roles. Third is to encourage young women to get involved. Fourth is to speak up and call out gender bias. Fifth is to consciously overcome gender bias in professional roles, be it hiring, mentoring, or salary. Sixth is to redefine success for the well-being and career progression. And 7 is to better support for return to work post-maternity leave. By choosing to ignore inequity for women, you become accountable for allowing it to continue. Speak up, promote the work of your female colleagues, and give them a voice and visibility. So what can you do? You can be part of the change. Mentoring and checking your own unconscious bias are important starting points for change. You can join us on the Women in Coastal website. So unconscious bias or implicit bias, this is really about people's subconscious attitudes towards others. Everyone has some degree of unconscious biases. Explicit biases can be self-reported and avoided more easily than implicit bias. This analogy of an iceberg is a really useful one, with a line of consciousness which can be moved up and down. So we can't fully eliminate unconscious bias, but we can become more aware of it, and hence lift the iceberg into consciousness. For example, disability discrimination due to implicit bias may be possible by not recognizing that people may have hidden disabilities, such as diabetes or mental health conditions. More subtle microaggressions can often reveal unconscious bias. So being aware of people's experiences and not be afraid to correct yourself and apologize if you make a mistake are crucial first steps. Another useful way of thinking about this is like a triangle, with implicit bias, stereotypes, and microaggressions on the three sides. Stereotypes are judgments or characteristics attributed to specific groups of people that may or may not be true for any one specific individual in that group. Microaggressions are subtle or nonverbal insults, indignities, denigrating messages towards an individual due to their marginalized identity. Microaggressions are often committed by well-intentioned people who are unaware of the hidden messages conveyed or the impact of their statements. For example, I felt so hurt by somebody calling me a non-traditional student at a conference because there's such a strong tradition of education in my family across the generations. Mentoring is one way of helping the next generation of scientists achieve their full potential. Mentoring can include increasing motivation, giving advice, providing role models for success, providing career direction, more formal coaching, providing moral support, goal setting, and training opportunities. So some top tips for mentoring. Before you start, agree on how you'll meet. You need to have a conversation to agree what you'd both like to gain from the mentoring relationship. Mentoring is a supportive form of development that helps an individual manage their career and improve their skills. A mentor should be compassionate, inquisitive, positive, authentic, approachable, encouraging, and kind. They should be able to listen well, ask open questions, offer non-judgmental, constructive feedback. They should be able to be willing to share knowledge, expertise, experience, and resources. More broadly speaking, did you know that mentoring is about sharing skills? A mentor can be more senior than the person they're mentoring, or more junior than the person they're mentoring, something which is known as reverse mentoring. Reverse mentoring is when senior members of staff are mentored by junior members of staff or students. This encourages senior members of the organisation to look inward and address structural issues within the workplace. It's ideal for gaining an intergenerational perspectives and building bridges and greater understanding between communities. It encourages senior members to ask themselves, what else can I do? Creating a more approachable and inclusive power dynamics within the organisation. It needs open and honest feedback and fosters a culture of trust. For example, a university institute director may not be aware of the challenges and pressures faced by junior staff with intersectional identities. A non-judgmental and respectful dialogue is a key factor to determining its effectiveness. Reverse mentoring can help bridge the generation gap, improve team dynamics and understanding of different outlooks and opinions. We all can learn from different generations and cultures, and this photograph beautifully summarizes this. The young boy with the laptop can share his technological expertise with the old lady, who can share her wisdom. In some cases, lessons he would remember all his life. This simple and practical method of learning can also be applied in the workplace. So, take-home messages and actions which can be easily implemented. Firstly, have a robust complaints policy and support structures in place. Take complaints seriously and be willing to make real changes. Secondly, learn about intersectionality and use it as an analytical framework to dismantle experiences of oppression and discrimination. Develop an anti-racist policy and actively become anti-racist. Encourage staff and students to take part in the next round of the URGE project. Form an Institute of Zoology pod as part of to learn about the social science of racism and policy. Establish a mentorship program for students to get career support, and establish a reverse mentoring program for those in senior positions to be mentored by juniors, particularly those with intersectional identities. Implement the 7 steps to improve gender diversity in STEM, and invest in unconscious bias and justice, equality, diversity and inclusion training for all staff and students. And of course, keep an open mind. Minds are like parachutes, they only work when they are open. So that concludes my talk. Remember, the difference between stumbling blocks and stepping stones is how you use them. I'd like to thank the British Ecological Society and of course the Institute of Zoology for inviting me to do this talk. to NUI Galway and ICRAG for sharing their survey data, and to Women in Coastal Geoscience and Engineering for supporting this work. Any questions? Thanks for listening. We can do it.